llamo Pablo Martínez Nuevo, soy ingeniero de telecomunicaciones y voy a continuar mis estudios doctorales en MIT, en Cambridge, en Boston. MIT es la universidad número 1 en mi campo. Luego, tal vez son grupos únicos a nivel tecnológico e innovación tecnológica, y creo que es el mejor sitio para poder seguir innovando.
Soy Javier Castillo, estudié Ingeniería Industrial en ICAI y ahora estoy haciendo el programa de MBA en la Universidad de Stanford. Elegí Stanford por varias razones. Quizá destacar el perfil entrepreneur del cuerpo estudiantil, ¿no? Es impresionante ver la cantidad de compañeros míos que están montando empresas ya, que ya las han montado, y pensé que la experiencia de contraste de estar con tanto entrepreneur, que quizá es un poco lo que no hay tanto en España, pues iba a ser más enriquecedora.
Mi nombre es Nuria González Campaña, estudié Derecho en la Universidad de Barcelona, luego estudié un máster en Relaciones Internacionales en Estados Unidos, con una beca también de otra fundación española. Llevo unos años trabajando en el Departamento de Derecho Público de Garrigues y también doy clases de Derecho Europeo en ESADE. Y ahora quiero enfocar mi carrera profesional al ámbito exclusivamente académico para poder participar en el futuro en los debates públicos de la sociedad española. Y me gustaría hacer un doctorado en Derecho Europeo en una universidad británica y dedicarlo al estudio de la ampliación interna de la Unión Europea en caso de secesión de una parte de un Estado miembro. Y ahora con los casos de Cataluña y de Escocia es un tema interesante y muy efervescente.
Mi nombre es Laura González Flores, soy de Madrid, estudié Derecho y Administración de Empresas en la Universidad Pontificia de Comillas en ICADE. En agosto iré a Boston, a Harvard, a hacer un MBA durante 2 años. Llevo 5 años de experiencia profesional y he hecho consultoría, he hecho banca de inversión y ahora estoy en capital riesgo, en private equity, y mi objetivo es combinar la formación operativa y financiera en el mundo empresarial y convertirme en una directiva.
Yo soy José María Carabias, llevo 6 años viviendo en Londres, he estudiado Economía y Finanzas 2 años en la London School of Economics y llevo ahora mismo 4 años terminando mi doctorado en la London Business School, donde también imparto clases de contabilidad y finanzas. Y bueno, mi idea es, cuando me gradúe, incorporarme a una escuela de negocios de carácter internacional como profesor de business y obviamente en un futuro, por supuesto, volver a España.
Soy David Mejía, soy licenciado en Filosofía por la Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, en Teoría de la Literatura por la Complutense, tengo un máster por la Fundación Ortega y Gasset en Cultura Contemporánea y bueno, me he matriculado en el PhD, en el doctorado en CUNY University, en la Universidad de la Ciudad de Nueva York, y pretendo liderar a mi retorno a España un think tank, un laboratorio de ideas, centrado en ser un observatorio para la educación y la cultura, y también para contribuir a la difusión y a la promoción del español en Estados Unidos.
Me llamo Gonzalo Hafner, soy ingeniero industrial de la Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. En los últimos 3 años he estado trabajando en Boston Consulting y he tenido una primera experiencia emprendedora. Y he elegido estudiar en Columbia porque creo que me va a aportar mucho para mi futuro. Es una de las mejores universidades del mundo. Y me apetecía mucho también la oportunidad de vivir en Nueva York.
Mi nombre es Antonio García Sansigre, yo estudié en ICADE, soy empresario, puse en marcha una empresa en el año 2003 con 25 años, la hice crecer, actualmente tenemos 12 empleados y a día de hoy me dedico a la consultoría. ¿Y por qué Stanford? Principalmente porque lo que quiero hacer es hacer un cambio de carrera, aprovechar toda la relación que hay en el ecosistema emprendedor de Stanford y tender puentes en España, principalmente. Y en particular, una de mis ideas es poner en marcha las técnicas de marketing masivo aplicadas a la industria del capital riesgo, y de esa forma se impulsa tanto la oferta como la demanda de inversores y de inversiones.
Me llamo Pablo Sánchez Sandofemia y voy a ir a estudiar en Estados Unidos Ingeniería Mecánica y Políticas Tecnológicas. Las razones que quiero estudiar estas dos cosas: primero es porque quiero adquirir una base técnica en Ingeniería Mecánica, y después con el máster de Políticas Tecnológicas podré combinar tanto lo que es la política, la economía de ciertos proyectos tecnológicos para poder desarrollarlos en países del tercer mundo. Una de las cosas que yo quiero hacer es hacer diseño sostenible para países en vías de desarrollo, comunidades que no tienen los medios y simplemente no son capaces de desarrollarse por sí mismos. Entonces yo no solo quiero enseñarles a pescar, pero también enseñarles cómo vender ese pescado. Entonces tecnología apropiada, como se dice en Estados Unidos, y esta tecnología que la puedan usar para ellos mismos ser los dueños de su progreso.
Pues soy Íñigo Barbet, estoy ahora trabajando en McKinsey, llevo 2 años trabajando en McKinsey y soy ingeniero industrial de la Politécnica de Madrid. La verdad es que he elegido Columbia a nivel académico por la componente financiera. Yo quiero luego trabajar en el sector de la energía y creo que la componente financiera es clave en el sector. Segundo, por una componente de investigación que tiene en tema de combustibles alternativos y más, que también me interesa mucho. Y luego, bueno, tercero, porque está en Nueva York y las que me apetece muchísimo estar 2 años viviendo en Nueva York.
Me llamo David Colino Llamas, acabo de enterarme que soy becario de la Fundación Rafael del Pino. Y nada, estoy estudiando un doctorado en economía en el MIT, en Estados Unidos. Estoy en 2º año y bueno, continuando con mi doctorado con mucha ilusión y más ahora que voy a tener apoyo de la Fundación. El MIT, bueno, en economía, el MIT es uno de los mejores sitios para estudiarla del mundo. Mis compañeros de clase y los profesores son genios, son admirables. Son gente con mucha motivación y yo creo que es el lugar idóneo para estudiar un doctorado en economía. Y además de eso, yo tengo un perfil inicialmente de ingeniero y como ingeniero siempre aprecié mucho el MIT, siempre consideré que era un sitio de ensueño en el que quise ir desde pequeñito.
Lo hago con miras con una iniciativa empresarial, que es otra de las razones por las que he solicitado esta beca. Está bastante alineado con mis objetivos después de acabar mi doctorado y creo que casa bastante bien lo que es el espíritu emprendedor en MIT con los objetivos de la Fundación de Formación de Dirigentes y Empresarios.
Destacaría algo que creo que he tenido la oportunidad de ver en Estados Unidos ya durante este año, que es quizá la cohesión de la propia asociación de becarios, ¿no? Ves cómo la comunicación existe, el diálogo existe, independientemente de la localización de los diferentes becarios y bueno, creo que eso es un activo crítico, ¿no? Y muy a tener en cuenta.
Es una de las mejores fundaciones de España, con uno de los mejores programas de becas y porque ofrece la posibilidad de integrarte en una red de exalumnos, de exbecarios excepcional, con mucha actividad, con una actividad muy intensa y creo que eso era también una gran oportunidad.
La Fundación Rafael del Pino no es solo, obviamente, un premio a la excelencia y una ayuda económica importantísima, yo creo que es una puerta y un círculo de relaciones en el mundo empresarial español que no tiene precio.
El prestigio de las becas que otorga la Fundación del Pino está, es muy reconocida y bueno, por formar parte de una comunidad de becarios con los que pueda intercambiar pues, ideas de negocio y tener impresiones de carácter intelectual y demás cosas.
Elegí la Fundación Rafael del Pino porque comulgo muy bien con su filosofía, considero que esta es un proyecto emprendedor, un proyecto que contribuye a mejorar la sociedad. Y bueno, creo que estas son las bases fundacionales de esta institución y por eso bueno, pues busqué apoyo aquí y lo he encontrado.
La Fundación Rafael del Pino sin duda es de las más prestigiosas de España y yo tenía claro que participar en un proyecto como el de la Fundación, ser miembro de este equipo de personas y ser becario pues iba a ser además una oportunidad para en el futuro tener más oportunidades, me va a impulsar en todo lo que me proponga en el futuro.
¿Por qué la Fundación? Llevo trabajando con la Fundación Rafael del Pino desde el año 2003 como proveedor, curiosamente, hasta el año 2008 y siempre he mantenido relación con ella, acudiendo después, posteriormente, como asistente a sus encuentros, sus actos.
Es una oportunidad impresionante porque el problema es que en este campo hay muy pocas personas que dan dinero para esto. Las corporaciones principales americanas, el gobierno, el ejército, no da dinero para gente que quiere hacer proyectos en comunidades que no tienen nada. Entonces es muy difícil conseguir que profesores te patrocinen para estudiar esto en este campo. A nivel, podríamos decir, a nivel económico por razones obvias, a nivel, digamos, más allá, la verdad es que para mí es un honor, un privilegio, la verdad es que pertenecer a un grupo de becarios tremendamente selecto y bueno, por los que yo conozco de una calidad personal y profesional que para mí es inigualable. Y la verdad es que es un honor para mí pertenecer a ese grupo y luego poder participar en la labor de la formación de la Fundación más adelante.
Bueno, la Fundación Rafael del Pino, primero creo que es un apoyo muy bueno para cualquier estudiante que quiera proseguir con sus estudios de posgrado en el extranjero. Tienen obviamente una beca muy atractiva y los alumnos y la red de la fundación es impresionante.
El máster es algo completamente distinto a lo que estamos acostumbrados en la carrera. Nos enseñan a trabajar en equipo, a gestionar proyectos, a gestionar también los grupos de trabajo. También es convivir durante todo el día, al final termina siendo como una pequeña familia y luego encima todo complementado con la parte de las prácticas que sirve para poner en marcha todo lo que hemos aprendido. También tiene una parte final de economía donde aprendes un poco de todo, de la parte económica de los proyectos, un poco de macroeconomía, microeconomía y son temas completamente diferentes, como ya he dicho, a los de la carrera. Entonces es algo que nos complementa nuestra formación como ingenieros y que luego nos viene muy bien para nuestra vida profesional.
La experiencia laboral, la verdad es que fue una oportunidad, es decir, nos hicieron un assessment y nos distribuyeron en diferentes unidades de Ferrovial. En nuestro caso fuimos a aeropuertos y a Cintra. Entonces tuvimos una semana aquí en el territorio nacional en la que estuvimos aprendiendo con diferentes directores, diferentes jefes de departamento, las diferentes actividades que hacían, cómo se comunicaban, cómo se comportaban con sus allegados, con todo el mundo, vimos la interrelación que ofrecían y luego tuvimos la oportunidad de irnos un mes en nuestro caso, a Stansted, en Londres. Y la verdad que la oportunidad genial, estuvimos con BA, estuvimos aprendiendo muchísimo, estuvimos en el negocio, en una parte del negocio estratégico, lo que nos dio una oportunidad para llegar más allá de no ser simples becarios que parece que solo no hagas nada, sino que estuvimos con responsabilidad, hablando con inversores, hablando con los jefes de los departamentos, es decir, que la verdad que una oportunidad única.
Pues nuestro proyecto se llama Bases para una Estrategia Nacional de Movilidad. Y pues como bien indica su nombre, estamos buscando cómo conseguir que algo tan importante como el transporte, lograr reducir considerablemente las emisiones de CO2 y mejorar la calidad de vida de las personas. Es lo que siempre estamos buscando. Para ello hemos propuesto una serie de medidas y hemos pensado en cómo se implementarían en la vida real y ha sido una experiencia magnífica.
El máster para mí ha sido una experiencia increíble. Me siento muy afortunada de haber sido uno de los pocos seleccionados para realizarlo, porque la verdad que cada profesor que venía era mejor que el anterior, todos los profesores eran gente increíble y no solo en las clases, sino que como compartíamos con ellos almuerzo y comida, en todo momento estaba aprendiendo algo interesante. Luego, además, como compartíamos un centro con gente de Ferrovial sobre todo, pero incluso de otras empresas, pues en el ratito después de la cena también teníamos la oportunidad de hablar con la gente y también te aportaba un montón de experiencias y la verdad que a mí me ha encantado. Y luego, por supuesto, mis compañeros, pues la verdad que hemos tenido suerte y desde el principio nos llevamos todos súper bien y la verdad que ha sido una experiencia increíble que yo repetiría y le aconsejo a todo el mundo que pueda, que si puede, que lo haga.
La parte española te sirve para conocer un poquito lo que es Ferrovial dentro de España, que en nuestro caso, que éramos Ferrovial Servicios, fuimos a prácticas con ellos, ves lo global que es. Y luego en el extranjero nos sirvió como para darnos cuenta de cómo se trabaja allí, lo importante que puede llegar a ser una empresa española fuera de las fronteras de nuestro país y la verdad que lo disfrutamos muchísimo. La gente nos trató genial, estuvimos muy cómodos y la verdad que fue una experiencia inolvidable.
Nos hemos centrado en la implantación del modelo M2M a la gestión de servicios urbanos y bueno, como nosotros éramos de la parte de Ferrovial Servicios, hemos querido hacer esta parte de gestión de servicios urbanos.
El máster ha sido especial, yo había hecho ya otro máster, pero ha sido una manera completamente diferente, hemos convivido mucho tiempo juntos, la forma de dar las clases han sido todas muy dinámicas, con gente de profesores de diferentes países también y la verdad es que ha sido muy interesante. Bueno, ha sido una semana aquí en España y luego ha sido 3 semanas en el extranjero. Nos ha permitido ver cómo se trabaja en otros países, además en España. Nos ha permitido ir a reuniones y estar a unos niveles que vamos a tardar muchos años en llegar, ver cómo se trabaja y aprender sobre la experiencia y de grandes profesionales.
Nuestro proyecto trata sobre la innovación dentro del sector de la construcción, fuertemente tradicional. Entonces lo que se nos pidió fue pensar acerca de la incorporación de nuevas tecnologías dentro de la construcción con el objetivo de mejorar y ser más competitivos respecto a otras empresas, incorporando nuevas tecnologías para pues, optimizar en cuanto a producción y en cuanto a temas de costes.
Bueno, pues realmente el máster ha sido un poco el trampolín para poder conseguir un trabajo. Yo incluso en las propias prácticas me ofrecieron ya directamente quedarme en Londres, en Heathrow, y estoy muy contenta y realmente el máster ha sido una oportunidad para todos.
I came here to talk about officially anti-fragile, which is something that doesn't break when there's a random event and in fact even benefit from it. But in fact I'm mostly going to talk about fragility. But anti-fragile is just a footnote on the notion of fragility. The big step you make is in identifying the fragile. The entire idea that there are two approaches in life. One, to try to read into the future and guess and understand risks, and we're very poor at it. And in fact, the more we predict, the more we measure risk, the more vulnerable we become to shocks, because people take a lot more risk under the illusion of prediction when in fact they don't predict. The other method approach is to identify what doesn't break when you make a mistake and what a system that would tolerate mistakes would look like. And hence that measure of fragility that I'm introducing. You can measure fragility, you can in anything. A glass, this, I know why it's fragile because it breaks, and things like that. So I will talk about fragility, the concept of what is fragile. I will talk about the robust and something I call anti-fragile, which is the property of things that can gain from random events, from shocks, from disorder, from time, things that can really handle a mistake and even benefit in the long run because they can handle mistakes very well. In the same category I call the disorder cluster. I put all these things that benefit from that cluster, and that cluster, of course, as I said, includes time, error. So in the same category, my bones, they like stressors. My body likes random feeding. You need variation, variability, volatility. You gain from it. So there are things. I study that category of object and realize that in fact the world is still around. Okay, yet we're not good at predicting. So we're going to do something right. And in fact, things that have survived are those things that can handle these mistakes and even benefit from them. Most of innovation comes from mistakes. Most of the drugs you see on the market are here as side effects of other drugs. They come from mistakes. So the anti-fragile is something that when you make a mistake, typically it's either harmless or an opportunity. In the long run, you're going to get opportunities like that because you cannot probe a complex system that's very opaque simply with knowledge. You cannot.
What Spain needs is new industries and new jobs for its young people to take up. So it had a big construction boom. It's had many people employed by governments. But Spain needs a Spanish Apple, a Spanish Intel, a Spanish Google. And that's what the Spanish government should be focusing on as well. Are there things within Spanish laws and regulations that make it more difficult to set up a business and make it harder for businessmen to think, I want to start my business in Spain? Because now that's what every country in the world wants. It wants businesses to set up there. And until that question is cracked, then Spain can't grow. What's happened in Spain is that Spain has taken this huge hit to its income, but it has become more competitive. So there is no trade deficit, wages have come down, and Spain is now competitive again. So there is hope that Spain can recover. But we come back to this question of, and of course Spain has been allowed more time to sort itself out by the European Central Bank, and indeed by the other countries saying you don't have to bring the deficit down as quickly as before. So that's good. But the question is, can the Spanish economy generate the jobs needed to employ its young people? And if it doesn't, it won't grow. And if it doesn't grow, it can't pay back the debt. So that's the big challenge. Who is going to employ the 27% of Spaniards who are out of work at the moment? Where are the industries to come from? That's the big thing going forward that Spain has to concern itself with. I think it's possible, of course. And a year or so ago, it seemed more likely. What has happened is that the European Central Bank has basically underwritten the debt of troubled countries like Spain and Italy, and that has bought the system a lot of time. So I think the problem is not that the markets are going to break up the euro, but that the voters might. So throughout Europe, we've seen country after country go through austerity, and it means year after year of high unemployment and lower incomes for people. And we've seen in Greece and we've seen in Italy parties emerge that want to end the system and to move to a new system. And we could see it in Spain eventually, and we have it in Britain, of course. We have a party that's emerged to get 25% of the vote in the recent elections. So if you don't get growth, then I think you will eventually see the voters rebel, and they will vote in place parties that want to leave the euro, and that will happen in more than one country, I expect. So that's the danger. Well, I think you need a flexible labour market in countries. It won't solve 27% unemployment, but the danger is you get insiders who are in a job who you can't fire, and then companies don't want to hire young people because it's difficult to get rid of them again. So in an economy that's gone through a big adjustment like Spain, where you had so many people in construction, you need to find new industries, back to the same issue again, and those new industries have to be free to grow without too many regulations. If you look at America, America has these go-ahead industries, these technology industries, those biotechnology industries, these movie industries, these, so many things, and resources can be moved about America quite quickly. And that's what you need. Or even in Germany. In Germany, you have a plan to employ young people as apprentices, and you have youth unemployment there that is much lower. So again, back to the same issue. A labour market in which you're generating new businesses because they want to employ people, and not so many rules that you don't want to employ people because you can never get rid of them again.
Unemployment is terribly costly for workers, for their families, for the future of workers, because young people accumulate human capital by working, not by looking for work. And long-term unemployed have their future opportunities greatly reduced by having been out of work for a long time. So in many countries, unemployment is a crisis because it is not only taking a toll now, but taking a lasting toll that will hurt things. What's really important is to address unemployment. For countries that have the room, fiscal stimulus is what's called for. Monetary stimulus has been helpful, but by and large it has done as much as it can. It doesn't have the strength to address the high levels of unemployment continuing. For those countries like the US and Germany that have the fiscal room, fiscal expansion, particularly focused on investment, is very valuable right now. I focus on investment because the debt concerns are normally thought about in the ratio of debt to GDP. And anything that helps GDP grow faster will tend to lower that ratio. So investment to enhance growth is valuable. In the US, we have had decades of too little spending on infrastructure, and that would be high on the list of things to do. No, I don't think governments intend to increase unemployment. I think some governments have a mistaken idea that austerity will help. Business definitely needs its confidence enhanced, but confidence comes primarily from experience. When businesses succeed in selling more, they will become more eager to hire more. And that process is not helped by austerity, but hurt. Defined benefit pension systems with some assets or even with no assets can be sustainable if the levels of benefits and the ages at which they are claimed are suitably adapted to the finances that are available. What matters is that countries adjust automatically for the demographic changes that we see coming. This has been done in different ways by different countries. Sweden and Germany stand out as two countries that have done this. Sustainability is possible, but not by ignoring problems. The sooner pension issues are faced, the easier it is to face them.
Certainly I saw this global financial crisis coming because there was too much debt, leverage, risk-taking in many economies from the US to Europe. I thought it would be very severe. I said it will be the worst financial crisis in a long time. Now there is a recovery, but there are also serious downside risks for the global economy next year. In a worse scenario, you could have the Eurozone crisis getting worse. You could get a severe fiscal cliff in the US. You could have a hard landing of China. You could have a war in the Middle East that increases all prices. That will be a global perfect storm. Hopefully that downside scenario can be avoided and a baseline scenario will be milder than that severe return to another economic recession and financial crisis. But certainly there are risks out there. Certainly Europe needs austerity to make that sustainable. It needs structural reforms to increase growth and productivity growth. Those things are necessary, but Europe is thinking not enough about restoring jobs, restoring income, restoring economic growth. So I think that what Europe needs to think about is a plan that restores growth, and that requires slowing down some of the fiscal austerity, having a stimulus in country like Germany can afford it, having easier monetary policy by the European Central Bank, and having a gradual depreciation of the value of the euro that will restore the growth and competitiveness of the periphery. So we need policies that change not just the aggregate supply on the supply side, but also increase aggregate demand to restore economic growth and job creation. Spain is moving in the right direction. They are cleaning up the banks, that's necessary. They're doing fiscal austerity, that's necessary. They're doing the structural reforms. I would say that the pace of this thing has been a bit spotty. Some of the structural reforms, like on the labor markets and things that increase competitiveness, have to be accelerated. On the fiscal side, instead, I believe that the amount of austerity has been excessive, and that there has to be less front-loaded fiscal austerity, otherwise the recession is going to get worse. And on the banks, I think that this is the time to really recapitalize the banks fast enough so they can start having enough capital to restore credit growth that the private sector needs to generate capital spending, job creation, and more economic activity. So the pace of these reforms is not occurring in the right speed, even if the direction on all these dimensions is the right direction. The Eurozone right now is at a fork in the road. The current muddle-through approach of kicking the can down the road is not a stable equilibrium, it's an unstable disequilibrium. Either the Europeans are going to move forward in direction of more union and more integration, a banking union, a fiscal union, an economic union, and also a political union to make this loss of national sovereignty democratically legitimate. So either you move forward or otherwise you're going to move in the direction of disunion, disintegration, fragmentation, balkanization, with more countries getting in trouble, more countries needing that restructuring, and starting with Greece, you could have one or more members of the Eurozone exiting the Eurozone, and that could snowball eventually in the next few years in the direction of a full breakup. So if you want to avoid the breakup, you have to move forward in the direction of more union, more integration. You cannot just continue with the current muddle-through, kicking the can down the road approach. That's not going to work.
Democratizing finance means making our financial institutions first broader in their coverage, covering more people. Second, covering the kind of risks that concern people. Third, getting people more involved in financial decisions with help from advisors and with proper information. All those things that will help people manage their risks better and take advantage of opportunities better. I think financial education is important, and it's not well done yet. So schools need to have a financial education sequence in it. But on top of that, I think that we can't educate everybody adequately about finance. It's like medicine. You can't deal with medical problems by asking people to learn medicine. They need a physician who will tell them what's wrong with them and give them very clear instructions. The same thing is true with finance. I think we need expanding the personal financial advisors so that more people have them, really so that everyone has them. There's a natural role for the government and a natural role for private sector. There's also a natural role for nonprofits and nonprofit-like organizations. We've experimented through history about which kind of activity goes well in which kind of role. And there have been differences across countries. For example, when railroads were developed in the 19th century, in Europe they made them government projects. In the UK and the US they made them private projects. It worked out in both circumstances, but that's kind of a gray area. But we generally have certain kinds of things like education concentrated in the government, and but not completely either. So I think we have to experiment and see how things work out well. A lot of things that people want to do can't be done by an individual. You can go home and make your dinner, and you want to do that, of course. But many more things can't be done by an individual. Like you want to be healthy, you need a hospital. Or you want to be entertained, you need a theater. And so these things all require financing of activities. And always, they seem to involve lots of people, and they involve resources that come in, and they involve time. They have to take place over a long interval of time. Making these things happen, and happen consistently, is what finance is all about. Some people mention the government bond bubble in the United States. I'm not sure that qualifies as a bubble, but it might. At least the yields might go up and prices might fall as soon as there's a recovery. Other examples that come to mind are gold. We've seen a huge increase in gold prices. That might collapse, so it could be a bubble. Another example is farmland, and this one might have a while to go still. There's a lot of concern about higher food prices, about droughts in some parts of the world, pushing food prices up. And so that could sustain the boom we've seen in farmland prices for some time still to come. My book, Finance and the Good Society, was begun after the crisis. because I thought that there was so much hostility toward the financial sector that is misplaced. People may be angry about what happens, but we need the financial sector, and we need it in its many different ramifications. So what people really should be doing, if they're motivated by 15M or Occupy Wall Street or any of these movements, they should be motivated to get in and learn finance and to get inside and make it happen better.
Austerity strategy does not work. We have extremely high unemployment, and the logic of austerity, it looked wrong 2 years ago. It's now proved wrong from 2 years of experience. So we desperately need an economic strategy that will actually deliver jobs and growth, not a strategy that has failed already. Spain needs to replace the hole that has been left in its economy from the collapse of the housing bubble. And to do that, it really needs a major increase in exports in its tradable sector. So Spain needs to become much more competitive in international markets, which is going to require that Spanish costs fall compared with those of the rest of Europe. The United States has plenty of problems, but last week's agreement was really a very small thing. It was a step in the right direction, but it was a small one. It's a better move on the banks, but even there probably not sufficient. It really does nothing to address the larger problem of growth. So no, unfortunately, this was just a it was good news because we've become so accustomed to very bad things from the European Commission, but this wasn't actually a good agreement.
I do believe that in the recent time that actually the government activities has been caused stock prices to go up and down. So the macro and the banking, the central banker activity has caused a lot of the effect, the so-called systematic risk in the market. So as a result of that issue, then fundamentally whether from the market itself we get good predictions about the future, or is it the case that it's just a better prediction about whether the government's going to support the market? So we saw yesterday a couple of days ago where, I think it was yesterday actually, Chairman Bernanke gave a talk before Congress, and Congress then said that we thought that it was necessary to keep interest rates low for a long period of time, which meant that people believed there was going to be more quantitative easing where the stock market went up. Why is that the case? Because the government's going to be buying bonds, forcing individuals then into riskier instruments, and so as they had done in the past. So I worry that what we're doing is we're taking away sort of macros being the government monetary policy and fiscal policy has always been important, but now it's getting to be a much larger piece of the puzzle than I think it should be. I wish it were the case that when banks did not understand the ramifications or the implications of exotic instruments, they would regulate themselves and not issue them, because certain things are not possible to be modeled or not possible to be understood, the implications of that. And a lot of the products are sold in ways that are not really in the best interest of clients or customers, because there are a lot of hidden options or hidden things in those instruments. If, for example, an investment bank such as Goldman Sachs takes a $200 million profit on building a structure, then someone has to have a $200 million loss. Not someone can't have a $200 million gain and someone not having a loss on that instrument. So the accounting system creates the wrong incentives. So I would hope that regulations or accounting regulations or how things are recorded would be such that that would limit or at least inform the other party that there's a lot of embedded options in that instrument that they're buying that'll cause them to appear as though they have a higher yield, even though there's a great chance that they will suffer a loss. I think that obviously that if you have competitive advantage, where is the competitive advantage of your economy, such as Spain vis-a-vis Germany? And if it's the case that that's what regulators, government officials should be really thinking about, And is it the case that it's so costly to establish new businesses, or it's so costly to change labor or in your activities, that's reducing your competitiveness dramatically unless you have monopoly in certain areas. And basically, if, say, Greece has a monopoly in tourism, then fine. You can try to stimulate ways in which your tourist industry can grow, but next door is Turkey. So if the euro's too high and your prices are too high and too rigid, then basically Turkey's going to take many of the people who would come to visit in your country. So competitiveness really is what is your competitive advantage and what is your competitive disadvantage, in the sense that rules and regulations that are put into place are not fostering an ability to grow in those dimensions. And the problem now in some parts of Europe is that the adjustment has to come through the labor price, has to come through the housing price or the value of assets price, and not through depreciation of the currency. So that's the cost. The benefit of Europe is a common market, a common culture, a way to end wars. The cost is the adjustment has to come through the labor price and the value of assets, as when we were on the gold standard. So now, well, we have to live with that. And the problem is to fight that, we have to realize that in a competitive environment, if that's the only adjustment mechanism for a country, then we have to understand that pain and how to handle that pain and that adjustment.
Spain is a bit peculiar in that respect. Within Europe, you're right to highlight that issue. I think the main reason is the dual structure that there is in the Spanish labor market, the coexistence of contracts that are of long duration with security of employment, and then short duration contracts that have practically no security of employment. And the response of employers, both when the economy is going up and when it's coming down, is to use these short-term contracts to speed up the adjustment to anything that they see in the market. So when the economy is recovering, for example, they say, oh, well, I can create one of these new jobs quickly to take advantage of this recovery, and if it proves to be fragile in the short run, I can always get rid of this worker. Then when the time comes for the worker to be considered for a more regular contract, then the employer might say, well, I'm not sure yet about the recovery, so let's not give a permanent contract to this worker, let's cut it down, and then maybe hire another worker to a similar type of contract until we see the situation improve. I think that's the main reason for the bigger volatility that we see in Spanish unemployment. But maybe I should say that there is also another contributory factor, and that's the structure of the Spanish economy was more geared to sectors that do have this higher churning of jobs than sectors in Europe. They are used correctly in that if you give an employer, a company, a certain structure in the labor market, then he should use it in the way that maximizes his profit, because we know that those are the best principles on which a company works. Mm-hmm. So it's using it in the way that is best for his company. But rather than not correct, I would say it's used in an unintended way, because I'm sure those who devised them never intended them to be used like that. They intended them to help in the job creation. And in the first upswing that we had through the 90s or something, they did help in job creation, but then they didn't anticipate what use they had in the downswing, which made things worse. I don't think it's the job of the government to direct the economy in certain ways. The role of the government is to provide the right institutional structure for economic development and production for the private sector to take the right incentives. For example, on the question of the contracts that we mentioned before, the right approach of the government, there's no doubt in my mind, that is to abolish this distinction between contracts, have one contract. Maybe have security of employment. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if it builds up over a longer stretch of time when the firm will know that that employee is suitable for the company and so on. You could have that. And it will give the right incentives for production. But once you do that, and once you secure the rights of any company to new products, new discoveries that it has for a short time, then the economy itself will direct onto the sectors that are the most beneficial to the economy. Now, in a country like Spain, for example, there is future, I think, in high value-added agricultural products. Italy has succeeded in that. Italian olive oils, pastas, cheeses. France as well with wine especially. I mean, those products are built on the natural resources of countries like Spain, the sunshine, the fertile soil, and they are high, and they do have a high value added. And with rising living standards in Europe and throughout the world, there's a lot of future in those. Hong Kong is now the biggest buyer of quality European wines, for example, outside that. Then inevitably, with the aging of our populations and with rising standards, we need to create jobs in the health and social care sector. Again, that's not for the government to direct it. It's more like the government should provide the right framework for that, and then the private sector will move in. In the case of agricultural products that I mentioned, we do need to secure the property rights to these products, which the European Union, of course, is doing. Like sherry is produced in here and there, and that's the only place where they can call it sherry, not being produced in England, bottled in England from foreign wines and call it sherry, which used to be the case. The reforms that have taken place over the last year or so are in the right direction, that they close the gap between the contracts. I mean, more needs to be needed. But it's not something that you will see the results immediately, actually. You might see movement again in the right direction, in that you may see unemployment not rising anymore or falling a little bit. But to see a marked big impact, I think we have to wait for the recovery to come. Recovery is not going to come from this kind of reform. This reform will help the recovery when it comes, and then when we have a recession next time, because inevitably we're going to get another one in the future, then the situation will not be as bad. Recovery needs to rebuild confidence in our banks, in the economic system, in the European economy that Spain depends so much on. Once those things are restored, and the recovery comes and the new jobs are being created within the new framework, especially if there is more reform and there is uniformity of contracts, and employers feel confident that it's a good new arrangement, unions start cooperating in the new arrangements, then when the next recession comes, you will see a big difference.
Our theories of macroeconomics, developed from the age of Keynes, Milton Friedman, and others, were developed without a sufficient appreciation of the practical importance of moral hazard in financial institutions. And the basic truth is, when you say the world today, for the last several decades, international financial flows have gone much more from poor countries to rich. One of the most important things happening in our lifetime, more important, I think, for human welfare even than our current financial crisis, is the great development of better economic systems in China and India, in other countries great countries of Asia and Africa and South America, that have unleashed the productive potential of people, of billions of people across the world, which makes them richer and more productive, which makes all of us living in a more prosperous and richer world. Why does money flow from China to America instead of the other way around? Everyone understands that there's more there are great productive investment possibilities in China. Why don't I put my life savings there? Because I personally don't trust that there are financial institutions in China that will pay it back to me. Obviously, every successful financial institution is based on legal and political environment that guarantees that investors will be protected against fraud and cheating by the banking system. The reason that billions of euros and dollars have flowed from poor countries to rich to Europe and America is because our financial systems before 2007, since 2008, have a lot of good protections in place that makes us the envy of the poorer countries of the world. That is why I think why our countries are richer, and because we have these controls in place. The financial crisis that we saw in 2008 showed it was not safe enough. The controls were well developed, but they need to be developed better. I think the most important thing that I say from a perspective of moral hazard, of an economist who studies the role of moral hazard in economic systems, is that further reforms, well-targeted reforms to make our financial systems even safer, are the way out of this financial crisis in the long run.
Programa Jóvenes con Futuro apuesta en el talento de ingenieros españoles para exponerlos a experiencia en Silicon Valley y que adquieran las habilidades técnicas suficientes como para que puedan ser emprendedores algún día. Para participar en este programa lo que necesitas es haber demostrado que sabes programar y que tienes habilidad técnica a través de tu expediente académico o de lo que hayas estudiado, hacer unas pruebas técnicas, referencias, una entrevista y demostrar sobre todo voluntad de querer cambiar cosas y montar proyectos. Eso en cuanto a tener éxito en el programa. Yo creo que para tener éxito como emprendedor lo que necesitas es sobre todo tener una habilidad especial para no tirar nunca la toalla. Además tienes que estar bien preparado, además tienes que ser creativo y además tienes que tener una especial habilidad para superar los miedos, ¿no? y no sucumbir ante los muchos inconvenientes que vas a encontrar a lo largo del camino. La idea del programa sí surgió por un poco mi experiencia personal, ¿no? De ver cómo saliendo de Salamanca, desde donde soy, estudiando en Madrid, luego estudiando en Boston y trabajando en Estados Unidos, me abrió la forma de pensar y la forma de entender y la forma de exigirme a mí mismo y la forma de relacionarme con otros que me ha llevado a hacer muchas de las cosas que he hecho en mi vida. Entonces pensé que era una buena experiencia que podría replicarse a través de un programa estructurado y así es como nació Jóvenes con Futuro.
We're a new educational organization focused at solving the biggest problems in the world by leveraging accelerating technologies. We have a set of technologies today like nanotech, biotech, robotics, medicine, computing. They're all doubling in their price performance at a very rapid pace, and therefore they can scale to a global level. And we try and teach our students how to create solutions that can scale at that pace to solve some of the biggest problems in the world. They will get a clear sense of where technology is going in the next 3, 5, 10 years across all of these fields. They'll see what's in the labs today, what's being developed tomorrow. They'll meet and talk to the thought leaders across all of these areas. And what we hope from them is they will combine these technologies and the breakthroughs that we're seeing to leverage those breakthroughs to solving global challenges like clean water or public health or education or security. Our alumni are not scared to think big afterwards, and we're seeing our alumni now take on big challenges in the future, and they're starting to win awards with their companies and with their ideas. In fact, a couple of Spanish alumni just won the Gartner Top Company of the Year. So there's some really good successes coming, and it'll take a little while for the model to bite fully, but we're starting to see good success early on. And certainly we seem to be creating leaders that will lead their futures of their countries and of their industries. If you want to make a big impact, you have to take a big risk. There's simply no way around it. And the way you have success is not by getting a great idea the first time. It comes from repeated attempts. When Larry and Sergey were raising money for Google, it took them 200 or 300 investor pitches before somebody funded them. Our head of faculty, Dan Barry, started applying for the space shuttle program when he was 23. He tried when he was 24, failure, 25, failure, 26, failure. He was 37. He'd failed 14 times, 14 years in a row to succeed, and then he succeeded. So success does not come from just having a great idea. Success comes from repeated attempts. Thomas Edison tried how many hundreds of times to create the light bulb before you have success? So success comes from repeated failures and learning from those failures. So for that to work, you need an environment that tolerates, and not just tolerates, but celebrates failures, because then you iterate to success.
El curso de Emprendedores con lo que de verdad importa de Rafael del Pino es un curso dirigido a personas jóvenes o de edad o de espíritu con ganas de emprender que buscan algo muy comprimido en solo 5 horas, que evidentemente no nos dará toda la información del mundo para emprender ni todas las claves, pero sí a modo de ignición, de llama, para a partir de ahí poder empezar y a crecer a partir de lo que vayamos pues recolectando en la vida. Yo lo considero como un curso bueno por asistir si o queremos empezar a emprender en el futuro o estamos empezando y nos iría bien un poco de orden en los temas como hablar en público, preparar un equipo, buscar cuál es el mejor modelo de negocio o incluso, ¿por qué no?, generar buenas ideas a partir de cosas que nos gustan.
Pues mira, lo que intentamos es dar en muy poco tiempo mucha información y básicamente nos centramos en 3-4 grandes ideas. La primera es cómo generar ideas, un montón de ideas, cantidad de ideas, más que calidad. En la segunda parte, más calidad que cantidad, es decir, filtramos. La primera es expansiva, la segunda es de síntesis. En un tercer bloque lo que hacemos es ver que realmente estas ideas nos van a dar dinero y intentamos coger metodologías de las empresas y llevarlas a tu proyecto. En un cuarto vemos ingredientes para el éxito, no desvelaré más. Y en un quinto vemos cómo contar esta idea a terceros.
Para mí, emprender es una actitud, y yo siempre lo he dicho, ser empresario es una profesión que se hace bien o se hace mal, se estudia en escuelas privadas o se estudia en escuelas públicas. Pero emprender no tiene nada que ver con ser empresario. Emprender es una actitud que lo puede tener un funcionario público, un empresario o un trabajador de una empresa. Al fin y al cabo es estar preparado para proponer soluciones alternativas a las cosas que nos plantea la vida, a los retos que nos plantea la vida, con creatividad y especialmente con innovación.
Pues mira, para mí un emprendedor es aquel que se levanta cada día y si no encuentra aquello que quiere, se lo inventa.
Mi consejo es que no busquen consejo en alguien que tiene 25 años, sino que lo busquen en alguien que lleva muchos más años emprendiendo. Entre ellos, Lluís Soldávila.
Pues yo le diría, primero, que si cree en algo, que lo intente tantas veces como haga falta, pero que intente formalizar de alguna manera, es decir, intentar utilizar justamente esto que explicamos, ¿no? Está muy bien tener ideas, pero aquí, por ejemplo, hemos dado una metodología en 40 minutos para hacer una primera validación, si con esto tiene pinta de que nos vamos a ganar la vida o no, de que vamos a ganar dinero, ¿no? Que al final es lo que intentamos, ¿verdad? Entonces, algo de método, pero sobre todo, actitud, ilusión, y aquí hemos dado claves para conseguir el éxito. Por tanto, una recomendación que yo les haría es que asistan a estos cursos.
Yo al gobierno, más que pedirle dinero para los emprendedores, barra libre de emprender, si quieres emprender te doy 3.000 euros, la pregunta es ¿para qué me los gastaría? en crear una empresa. ¿Y cuánto vale crear una empresa? Entre trámites y bloquear dinero y demás, 3.000 euros. Yo creo que el gobierno, si quiere hacer algo bien para los emprendedores, debería quitar palos de las ruedas, hacer que ciertas cosas no cuesten dinero, que no dar un cheque que se cobrará dentro de unos cuantos meses y que el emprendedor se tiene que gastar hoy para montar su empresa. Es dar facilidades que no dinero directo.
Me encanta que me hagas esta pregunta, porque yo les diría solo una cosa: pónganlo lo más fácil posible para la gente que tenga ideas, porque esta gente va a tirar adelante la economía, esta gente va a dar trabajo a otros. Por lo tanto, por favor, fácil, pero fácil, rápido, barato, sin complicaciones, es decir, bonifiquen a la gente que tenga ideas y que quiera invertir, porque es la única manera de salir de todo esto.
Vengo del Colegio Luis Buñuel y nuestro proyecto trata de decir los emprendedores que hay en nuestro barrio. Y yo entrevisté a un bar que se llama Verde y Algo Más. Y hemos llegado aquí y ahora éramos finalistas y hemos ganado.
Vengo del Colegio Luis Buñuel. Mi empresa es de la papelería, que se llama Quena.
Vengo del Colegio Luis Buñuel y yo tuve que entrevistar a mi madre, que trabaja en una peluquería, que empezó a trabajar desde los 16 años y tiene un negocio ahora montado en una peluquería.
Mi cuento trata de unos hombres que están mal de dinero y y abren una juguetería para conseguir más. Al principio van mal, pero después de un grande trabajo consiguen lo que querían.
Soy Andrea Martínez y ella es Laura Martínez y somos del Colegio Nuestra Señora de la Merced.
Y nuestra obra consiste en que nos vamos a graduar y para irnos de viaje montamos un pequeño negocio por internet donde vendemos ropa y zapatos y lo llevamos a domicilio.
Por su buen olfato para detectar una necesidad en un colectivo específico y por el buen gusto a la hora de ejecutarlo, otorgamos el tercer premio a la mini empresa Atmosphere.
Enhorabuena, ¿eh?
Nosotros hemos creado un ambiente terapéutico
de producción propia, fácil de usar y económico.
A día de hoy hemos registrado unos ingresos de ventas de 1.243 euros, consiguiendo un beneficio neto de 248 euros y una rentabilidad financiera del 48%. Donaremos el 45% de nuestros beneficios a la Fundación Proide, que gestiona proyectos educativos en diferentes países del tercer mundo.
No lose concentration, no nerves, no stress. Find the essence of studying with Atmosphere.
Descubre la esencia de estudiar con Atmosphere.
Gracias al señor Achievement y gracias por nuestra atención.
Por su versatilidad, funcionalidad, frescura y por ser el producto más juvenil y urbanita. Este segundo premio es para New Generation Company.
even if they were inside a bag on a rainy day?
Are you tired of the color of your bag?
Do you want your bag to look fashionable? Have you ever wanted your bag to look different? This is how the adventure started. We want you to leave the room asking for a cover-up today and show it to friends and family tomorrow. It's a simple, easy to use and good-looking product.
The fabric is easy to clean without using a washing machine, and it's produced locally so it's more environmentally friendly.
For only 10 euros, you avoid wasting hundreds of euros in pads, mobiles, don't have enough money for a new bag, buy a cover-up only for 10 euros. This price includes the cover and the case.
The case can be also used as a pencil case or a casual purse. Both the cover-up and its case can be personalized with different graffitis or permanent markers.
We've made ourselves known through different social networks and also with some interviews in the media.
The profits will be going to Casa Guadalupe, which we have been volunteering for 5 months.
What have we achieved today? Not just a plan, but a product, a supplier, and the proof that there is a market, not only in Spain, but also in foreign countries.
Our first problems were with the production, because we didn't have the fabrics. We didn't have enough knowledge of our product, and that's why we didn't order 200 units. We were too conservative and ordered 70 units. Right now, we are regretting that, because we had the opportunity to sell more. We contacted lots of people and companies until we got the unique producer of Stradivarius. Then we made a survey to know the market size that we own, and we found out that we could sell lots of cover-ups. The future plans that we have a month ago have been coming to reality with our summer collection.
As the sales and profit chart shows, we have had lots of benefits, with a gross margin of €5 per unit. We have sold a total of 100 units, counting the 50 we sold at the first.
Why you should vote for Cover Up? Because we have future ideas.
Because it protects your belongings.
It fits to the main bag brands.
Save your money. It gives you a new style at a lower price. Thank you.
And Cover Up!
Por ser un producto muy asociado a los valores y economía de España, en el que convergen varios sectores, por su buena ejecución en todas las fases de la competición y por sus buenos resultados y perspectivas de futuro como proyecto empresarial, el ganador de la 7ª competición nacional de mini empresas es, ¿lo sabes?
No.
Sun O'Clock.
It's killing to see this way, 'cause though the truth may vary, this ship will carry our bodies safe to shore.
Buenos días. ¿Sabían ustedes que la pareja del vídeo está siendo necesariamente precavida? Les explicaré por qué. Permítanme pedirles que miren a su derecha. Ahora, si son tan amables, miren a las personas situadas a su izquierda. Sería alarmante pensar que 1 de cada 5 personas que ustedes han visto sufrirán desde una fuerte quemadura hasta un, más que posible, cáncer de piel. Este dato, tan alarmante como desgraciadamente verídico y realista, motivó la creación de Sun Club, una mini empresa formada por 5 emprendedores de Barcelona. Adelante, Ignacio.
Como director general.
Alejandro.
Como director de finanzas.
Jake.
Como director de marketing.
Eduardo.
Como director de recursos humanos.
Y yo, Ricardo, su director de producción.
Sin embargo, ¿saben por qué se producen tantos estragos solares?
Si piensan que pueden aparecer por no aplicarse protección solar cuando estamos expuestos al sol,
están en lo cierto.
Aunque también aparecen por no aplicarse la protección solar correcta. Y aquí es donde hacen hincapié nuestro producto. Adelante, Ignacio.
Thank you, Alejandro. As we have already said, it is equally dangerous not to apply any sun cream as it is to apply the one protection.
And Ignacio, what has done Sun Clock to fight against this problem?
Easy. Our enterprise has developed a clock which is able to detect the sun radiation we are receiving in a precise moment. And depending on this quantity, it changes its color in order to indicate the exact protection needed.
Tell us what we will achieve buying a Santa Clock for the incredible price of only €2.
With Santa Clock, you will not only forget your worries and fears when being exposed to dangerous UV rays, but also you will know the appropriate cream for each moment.
Usted se preguntará, ¿cómo funciona una pulsera capaz de llevar a cabo una función tan compleja?
He aquí nuestra primera dificultad, pero con trabajo hemos desarrollado un producto de uso fácil.
¿Alguno de ustedes sabe qué hora es?
Exactamente, mirar la hora es sencillo y Sound Clock no lo es menos. Antes de salir de casa, exponga la pulsera al sol y observará como en la esfera del centro aparece un sol de un color determinado. En función de este, se aplicará el número de crema que el color indique.
Who's our product addressed to, Eduardo?
Well, it is true that our product is addressed to the whole population because we are all vulnerable to the sun. We have 3 potential clients. First of all, the mothers, who take care of the little children self. Secondly, the youth, concerned about the physical appearance. And finally, the elder, probably worried about the UVA health diseases.
¿Nunca sus madres o abuelas les han explicado que con 100 de las antiguas pesetas, menos de €1, compran mayor cantidad que actualmente?
En efecto, los precios suben.
Y en Sound Clock nos convencíamos de ello y ofrecemos nuestro producto al módico precio de €2. Consiguientemente, aumentamos las ventas y desanimamos a otras empresas a entrar en tan innovador mercado.
Thanks to our collaboration with Laboratories Esteban's team, Sound Clock has been on sale at 12 pharmacies in the last 4 months, in which 1,500 Sound Clocks were sold, totaling a sale of €3,000 and producing a benefit of €2,200, all of which will go to the Asociación Española contra el Cáncer, because our company is determined to play a role in the awareness of the danger of skin cancer.
It is widely known that social networks move the world we're living in, and thus we have created an account on Facebook and Twitter to become accessible worldwide. For further information, do not hesitate to visit our website www.soundoclock.net or contact us via email. Thank you for your attention, and remember, if you want to block the sun and not the fun,
It's Sound Clock now!